really good. But there were certain things she did that we've had a couple of talks, and for some reason, it wasn't that she was just blowing it off like it didn't mean anything, but for some reason, she just didn't catch on, didn't get with it. And I knew some of her coworkers were telling her, hey, you need to get with it in this area, and so on. And for some reason, she just never caught on until finally it was hurting us. And I had to have that difficult conversation. I didn't want to have it. I was a young manager, didn't know much. And I had to sit down with her. And some of the things I learned over the years I want to share with you. And it's one of the things I learned from that first conversation and then some subsequent conversations over the years. And the first thing I learned is don't put it off. Sometimes people want to put things off. It's a difficult thing. It's uncomfortable. You don't want to do that. You don't want to hurt somebody. But yet you don't realize that, especially if your team knows that you're going to have that conversation, and if it means letting somebody go, it's going to happen. If you put it off, a lot of bad things can happen. If you put it off, you give the wrong impression to the person you need to have the conversation with, because they may not know anything's wrong. Secondly, if you don't put it off and your team, if you do put it off, and your team realizes it's a conversation you have to have, and you don't do it, what happens now is frustration begins to build within your team. Secondly, credibility is lost by you because they're waiting for you to have that conversation. You're the one that has to have it. And thirdly, the business will suffer for it if you don't have it. So don't put it off, because only bad things happen. And also, you're giving a false impression to that person that nothing's wrong. So you need to have that conversation as soon as possible. But also, when you're having that conversation, check your ego at the door. That's the second thing. Don't go in there. I didn't go in like I'm the boss. I didn't do that, even though I was the manager, absentee owner, so I was the one in charge. There was no one else to talk to. But the thing is, I went in really like a Ben Franklin type. If you know history, Ben Franklin, a lot of wisdom, but he went into certain conversation as the innocent inquirer, meaning that he already knew what the whole deal was. He used to negotiate that way. He would sit at the table with heads of state from other nations, and although they might have not known as much as he did, but yet he went in, did his homework, he knew all about the deal, and yet he came into that negotiation as the innocent inquirer, asking them what they want, what they preferred, why they did, so on and so forth, and was able to steer the questions he had to a place where they actually came up with the similar ideas that they can agree on, and he was okay with it. It didn't have to be his idea. It was the idea they needed to close the deal. And he left with them with their dignity intact and so on, and his dignity intact, and it was a win-win across the board. So he checked his ego at the door, and he did what was best for the other people. And that's the thing, especially in that difficult conversation when you want to let somebody go, or you have to, I should say, because you really need to check yourself. Why do they have to go? Is it because you just don't like them? Are they good for the company or not? And so on. So make sure that if they have to go, it's a last resort, but they do have to, and make sure you have your team's agreement on the thing. And when you sit there, you have to check your ego at the door, but keep it as a win-win. That you really want them to understand they're valuable. Maybe it wasn't a good fit. That's a reality. And you want to be positive, you want to be affirming, but letting them know that there is a problem. They have to know that you were frustrated, but you have to do it in a way that's not offensive. That's why I said check your ego at the door and let them know what was the thing up front. Hopefully you had that in place. If you didn't, then you really can't even have that difficult conversation. It'll be more difficult if they didn't know what was expected of them up front. So have that too as a win-win. You can be able to go the length with people. And when you sit with them during that conversation, affirm them. One person I worked with for several years, and I had to let them go, and it had to be a parting of the ways. It was just too much water under the bridge. So what I did was I affirmed them that it was great for the time, and maybe it is time. I didn't have to rehash that, we didn't see eye to eye anymore. No, maybe it is time. And what I did is I gave them a good recommendation. Why? Because when they were good, they were on it. You didn't have to worry about anything. You could put something in their hands and they would take it. But it was a very difficult conversation, so I checked my ego at the door and I sat down with them and I shared what had to be done. I didn't put it off, did what I had to do. And third, make it a win-win. When you have to have that difficult conversation, that's why I said affirm, they have to be winning at the end of it. I was apologetic, and I always were when I had to let somebody go. I hated doing that. I still do. But the thing is, when it has to be done, it has to be done, and it's up to the leader. So I have that difficult conversation. I don't put it off. I check my ego at the door, and I come in with a degree of humility, helping them, because I'm going to have to help them get other employment. And what I'll do is I sit down and I seek to enunciate what I'm going to say in such a way where it's clear. And that's right, I use the word enunciate because sometimes we just gloss over it and we just mumble. But be very clear in what you're saying, but also I assure them that as I'm accentuating the positive, that those traits will be valuable in any company. Maybe it's just not a good fit here long term. And I'll help them. If they're valuable in a certain area, and they were that way for a time, I will help them get employment elsewhere. Why? Because that's a win-win. And it's also a win-win for your team, because your team watches how you handle that. And word will get back as people talk. It'll be a win-win for you, a win-win for your team, and a win-win for that person that you have that difficult conversation with. So I hope that helps you. And remember, please don't put it off. Check your ego at the door and make sure it's a win-win for everybody involved. And your credibility will go through the roof. And even the person you let go, many times you have won a friend. So I hope that helps you, and I hope you'll be able to use it. And thank you for spending this time with me and for the privilege of adding value to you. Till next time, bye-bye.